Well, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. As I could see, most of you are joining from the North and South America. So that means it's about the evening time for you, and we are about to start. Now, I'd like to get started just to do a little bit of a warm up. I know that some of the people are still trying to find their way here to this class. So I'm going to end the poll right now. Thanks so much for sharing where you are right now. And I want to perhaps start by saying, how do we get the most out of this class? I know you've come here to spend 2 hours learning about the GMAT, and I certainly want to make sure that we can walk away with a lot of valuable strategies. And the way for us to do this is we need to get a little outside of a comfort zone. You may have heard of the concept of a comfort zone. It's where nothing really happens. You are comfortable, but you don't really learn anything. You don't need to because you're very comfortable. So I'm going to give you some challenges all throughout this class so you can expand your comfort zone and learn a few really useful things that you can walk away with. Now, if you haven't done this sort of thing before, if you haven't done math for a long time, if you haven't been studying for the GMAT, some of these things might be quite challenging. So you might even feel like you are in what's called a panic zone. Now, I'm going to encourage you not to run away, but instead take this as a learning opportunity. Don't worry, we are going to break things down step by step so that by the end of this seminar, your panic zone becomes your learning zone, maybe even your comfort zone. So let's begin. We'll go through what exactly this class is going to be about, but as a warm-up, I'd like to do an exercise. This is a question from the GMAT that's a problem-solving question. I'm going to be quiet for maybe about 20 seconds or so. I'll let you deal with this question, and I'm going to ask you in a moment, what do you think is the right answer? All right, so it's been approximately 30 seconds. I'm going to give you 2 more seconds to choose an answer, and I'll share the results with you. All right, well, let's see how you did. As you could see by the majority vote, the right answer is C. Let's actually check if it is. Yes, C is the right answer. So collectively, we've gotten this question, and in fact, about half of the people, slightly over half here, got this question right. So congratulations if you did. Now, let me ask you a question. In order to do this question, what is it that you need to know? Certainly, we're dealing with a math problem, so we need to know some math. So what do we need to know from that math area from high school or from middle school? Well, here's what we need to know. First of all, we need to know what is an exponent, right? Because we're dealing with exponents. For example, we need to know that 2 to the power of 5 is simply 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. Now, if you know that, you can take those numbers, you can multiply them out, and then you just need to add them together. And you realize that if you add 1 to the power of 1, 2 to the power of 2, and 3 to the power of 3, it's going to be 1 plus 4 plus 27, which comes to 32. And then if you look at the answer choices, you would notice that 32 isn't among the answer choices, but again, we're dealing with powers of 2. And if you know what's an exponent, you should be able to keep multiplying 2 onto itself until you get to that 32 and count how many 2's you have, and you have exactly 5 of them. So the answer is C, 2 to the power of 5. So in order to do this question, that's all that we need to know. What's an exponent, how to add and multiply. And you might be wondering, well, wait a second, is this really what's tested on the GMAT? Or would the GMAT test some more complicated math, maybe calculus, maybe something from university? Well, let's ask the GMAT. Let's ask people who are developing the questions. I know many of them because I've been invited many times to go to a GMAT, special GMAT conference for test prep organizations, where the GMAT shares a lot of the information about the GMAT with us. So here's directly the quote from one of these conferences. What you need to know for the GMAT is not more than what is generally taught in a secondary school classes. And that's North American secondary school classes. Some parts of the world, it's even earlier, sometimes elementary school. So here's what you need to know according to the GMAT. Number one, some arithmetic, some numbers. Arithmetic is all about numbers. So you need to know some number theory. You also need to know elementary algebra. Notice the word elementary. I did not add this word. This is actually the word from the GMAT. And finally, some commonly known geometry concepts. Now, we are going to talk about all three today. I'm going to show you some examples from arithmetic, from algebra, as well as from geometry. All right, well, if that's all that we need to know, then we should be all able to do well on the GMAT. So let's now take what we've just learned. We've learned what's an exponent and how to add and multiply. And let's do another question, a slightly higher level question on the GMAT. I'm going to give you a little more time, maybe about a minute or so, or maybe even a minute and a half. But I'm going to ask you not to use calculators and not to use Google, because that's not what you can do on the test. So here's the question. I'll be quiet for about 60 to 90 seconds, and I will ask you to pick an answer when you're ready. You have 30 seconds to go, so please, if you haven't chosen an answer yet, please choose an answer, whatever looks better to you. The test is not going to continue until you choose an answer. All right, well, I hope that you didn't use a calculator when you chose this answer. So I'm going to end the poll right now. And I'm going to show you different ways of doing this question. Now, one of the ways to do this question is you could simply use the theory that we've learned in high school. Let's call it this theory way of doing this problem. So you could technically calculate what's 14 to the power of 4, 15 to the power of 5, 16 to the power of 6. You could add them up and get an answer. And the answer in this case is going to be D. So if you've gotten a D, congratulations. The problem with this approach, though, if you don't have a calculator, of course, it will take a long time. It might take like 8 minutes to do this. And what's the chance of making a mistake? Probably a very high chance. So let's talk about the different way of doing this question. And before we talk about that way, I'm going to teach you a strategy. And that strategy has to do with what's called units digits. So what is a units digit? Well, the units digit is the digit at the very end of an integer, at the very end of a whole number, just before the decimal point. So in this case, Imagine we have two numbers right here on the screen, and we're trying to multiply these numbers. Now, I'm sure you've learned the one multiplication. So if we were to start this one multiplication, then you know that the first thing we're going to do is multiply 6 by 7, and we're going to get 42. Now, 4 is then going to get carried over to the next digit, but 2 is going to stay where it is. So no matter what we do, no matter how long it takes us to complete this one multiplication, 2 is always going to be at the end. I can tell you, I've been teaching the GMAT for 11 years now. I have not done a one multiplication a single time. In fact, if you ask me to explain exactly how to do one multiplication, I probably won't be able to explain it to you because I haven't done it for many, many years, and yet I'm teaching the GMAT. So you need to understand how things work and not necessarily be able to do one multiplication. Now, this strategy works for multiplication, works for addition, it also works for subtraction. You just have to be careful with subtraction because you might need to borrow from the tens digit. What I have in front of me in the question is nothing but multiplication and addition. 14 to the 4 is simply 14 onto itself 4 times. Now it's 4 times, so let's start with something small. How about we just multiply it once? Well, obviously 14 to the power of 1 is going to be 14. The last digit is 4. Now, if I take 14 twice, which is 14 times 14, and if I focus on only the last digit, then 4 times 4 is going to be 16. The last digit is 6. I can keep going. I can keep multiplying that number by 4. I'm going to get 24. Again, don't worry about the 2. The last digit is 4. Again, keep going. I have a number that ends in a 4 multiplied by a number that ends in a 4 again. I get 16. The 6 stays. This is my units digit. So 14 to the 4 must have a units digit of 6. Well, we're almost done because 80% of the work here is actually dealing with 14. Because what's going to be the last digit of 15 to the power of 5? What do you think? Just put it in the chat box. What would that be? Yeah, you're absolutely right. Most of you are saying 5. 15 to the 5, so a number that ends in a 5 times a number that ends in a 5. 5 times 5 is 25. And times 5 is again 25. So no matter how many times we multiply it by 5, we're always going to get a 5 at the end. How about the 6? What's going to be the last digit of 16 to the power of 6? Yeah, exactly. Most of you are saying it's 6. So again, 6 times 6 is 36. 6 times 6 again is 36. So no matter how many times we do this, we're always going to get a 6 at the end. So now what we've got is a number that ends in a 6, which is 14 to the 4, and another one that ends in a 5, and another one that ends in a 6. The strategy works for addition. Again, notice how it's so easy. All we need to care about is the last digit. So we got 6 plus 5 plus 6 at 17. Get rid of the 1. We have a 7 at the end. How many answer choices end in a 7? Only 1. And that's a D. Now we've done much less calculation, and we can actually do this in 2 minutes. So that's what the units digit strategy is all about. Notice how it's so much easier to do this. And it's unfortunate that most of us haven't learned this in high school. We haven't learned these shortcuts. So this is a strategy that you can absolutely use in this question. But let me ask you a question. What if this is the last question on the test and you don't have 2 minutes, you just have 30 seconds? Is there anything that you can do to try to maybe guess intelligently what the right answer could be? Yes, because I asked this question, the answer would be yes. Let's call this the mastery way. This is the sort of a thinking that people who get to very high scores who don't have a math background, this is the sort of a way that they're going to think, right? So they're going to look at this question and they'll say, well, I've noticed something. What I've noticed is before I even began doing calculations that the answer choices are quite far apart. And if I wish, I could actually estimate my answer by simply doing a very rough calculation. And in fact, if I were to estimate this number, I don't need to worry about 14 to the 4 and 15 to the 5. These are small numbers compared to 16 to the 6. The 16 to the 6 is a big number, right? You may remember from a couple of slides ago, it was 16 million, and 15 to the 5 is 700,000. So big difference because of the exponential growth. So I could technically just estimate 16 to the 6. And if you know your powers of 2, it takes 10 seconds. So that would be all nice and dandy. There's only one problem, and that is the two answer choices that are very close, C and the D. So unless I somehow figure out what is right, I'm going to be stuck. So how do I break the tie? Well, I can go back and do the calculations, but I don't want this. I'm almost there. I'm 80% there. It's just now C or D. I have a 50-50 chance, but I want a 100% chance, maybe at least a 90% chance. So here's what I can do. Can anybody think of anything we can do here to break the tie between C and D? I already know it's really close. It's C or D. Yeah, what I can do right now is I could say, well, look, I know that the difference between C and D is the difference between the even and the odd number. C is even, D is odd. Well, if I look at my original question, I know that 14 to the 4 is even, 15 to the 5 is odd, 16 to the 6 is even. So if I add these three numbers out, I'm going to get an odd number. And of course, D is odd, therefore it has to be the right answer. So notice how here, how much math did we do in 30 seconds? Not very much, right? And if we've done very little math, what's the chance of us to make a mathematical error? Not very high, right? Probably almost zero. So that brings us to the point is, yes, everything on the GMAT is from secondary school. A little bit from high school, and actually a fairly large chunk from elementary school. So if we all graduated from high school, what actually would separate people who get 500 from people who get 700? Let's again ask the GMAT. Here's what the GMAT would say. Instead of testing our knowledge of math or knowledge of business or anything else, what the GMAT does is something different. Now, let me ask you this question. Do you think, like honestly, if you were a GMAT taker or GMAT test maker, if you were the person who actually creates the GMAT, would you want to give an unfair advantage to people who have a math background? Like, would you say, in all honesty, I'm trying to select the best candidates for the business school. I think the best candidates would be people who have a math background. They're going to make the best managers, the best business people. They deserve to go to the best schools. People who don't have a math background don't deserve to go to the good schools, right? That's probably not how they think. That is why the GMAT isn't about math. It isn't about knowing business even. It isn't about knowing some verbal theory or let's say molecular biology, because that's what could be tested in the verbal section on reading comprehension. So instead, what the GMAT evaluates is what's called higher order reasoning skills, right? So these are the skills that actually matter in the MBA classroom and in the 21st century workplace, right? If you've ever applied for a job, you probably remember that there was a section called skills. There were communication skills, problem-solving skills, decision-making skills, time management skills, probably not a lot about knowledge, unless you're applying to a very technical job. So that's really what it is going to be all about. It's going to be about demonstrating a different skill set. And it's going to be a little bit of a break from how we've learned in school. Because what I remember from my middle school and my high school is that my teachers, or at least most of them, told me that knowledge is power. So if I learn that biology or that chemistry, I'm going to be knowledgeable and very successful in life. That's what they told me. How much do I still remember from that biology or that chemistry class that helps me in my everyday life? Right? So essentially what they're saying is that if I want to learn how to drive a sports car, which is a skill, all I need is to gain some knowledge, essentially how to drive a car. So all I need is to read a driver's handbook. We've been conditioned to learn that way for many, many years in school, and that's why it's so hard for us to break that habit. In fact, have you ever worried maybe yourself about being able to do well on the GMAT? Have you maybe even thought, well, how would I do well on the GMAT if I don't have a math background? Or maybe you even know people who have a math background or engineering background. Maybe you have a math or engineering background, who've been studying for a while, maybe for many months, and are unable to see the progress. Now, imagine what it's like to study for a long time, give up your social life, study for many months, only to see the deadlines pass by, and there's some other people who don't have a math background, who seemingly are not that smart, who got their 700 plus score much quicker, got into the top schools because they applied early, they had a good profile, they had a high GMAT score, and they got into the top schools with some of the best scholarships while you are still studying for the GMAT, watching these deadlines pass by. And now you have to wait a year, or maybe even give up your dream of going to that school if it's really important for you to go there this year, or maybe not doing the MBA at all and settle for jobs that are not going to be as highly paid. Imagine what it would be like to buy a house in Toronto without an advanced degree. And the reality is these people are not smarter than you. They're just doing something different. And I have to confess, perhaps I'm going to introduce myself just very briefly and just stop sharing my screen for a moment and bring myself up on the screen. Well, I'm a person who's trained many of these people. I'm the person who's trained a lot of your competition to these business schools, so that without any math background, they can actually get the score of 700 plus in 2 to 3 months. In fact, one of the things that I think you might discover is that many of the GMAT instructors have math background. And I'll show you some examples. And I have a math background. I'm a GMAT instructor. But I also have to say that in our company at Admit Master, I'm an exception. I'm the only GMAT instructor who has a math background. And my GMAT score is the lowest of our instructors. I'll show you my score report in a moment. My score was 750. All of our other instructors scored higher. We have one instructor who is a ballet or ballroom dancer who scored 760 as an MBA. We have another instructor who is a professional actor, has a Bachelor of Theater and a Master's of Writing. So he writes books, he writes fiction, and he's also an actor in a theater. And he scored 780 on the GMAT with no math background, with a maximum score of 51. So how do they do this? Well, it's because they approach the GMAT differently. There's a different way to think. There's a different way to think about the test. There's a different way to approach questions. And what I'm going to do today is I'll share with you some of these strategies that we use to train people without math background, or maybe retrain people with the math background so that they can break that cycle of studying for many months and finally start getting results. I'm going to share these strategies with you, so I hope you take some good notes, because these strategies are going to help you do the same. Now, let me actually just really quickly share with you or reshare my slide, and I will show you my score report. So that's my score report, just so that you know everything is legit. And what we're going to do today is we started with a question to challenge you, to get you outside of a comfort zone. We'll, of course, talk about some of the things that everybody should know before they begin studying for the GMAT. You will have some practical quant strategies. So again, I'll encourage you to just grab that notebook and write things down. We'll also talk about what does it mean to be successful on the GMAT and how can you actually guarantee your own success on the GMAT. I'll talk about some resources that are going to help you study at home right now. Most of the people are studying at home at this very moment. I'll also share with you the step-by-step plan. It's just going to be 3 steps. As long as you follow them, you can get a score of 700 plus. So I'm going to unveil a big secret to you. And I'm sharing this completely free. So again, take notes, follow this, because I'd like for you to get the score of 700 or more. Now, at the end of this seminar, we're going to have some time for Q&A. We'll talk about some bonuses that you can get. And one of the big bonuses is we'll have a guest speaker, an executive director of admissions from the Ivy Business School. So one of the most competitive schools in Canada, if not the most competitive, is going to share with you what would it really take for you to get into a top tier business school. So stay tuned. This person is going to come here, JD, is going to come here in approximately an hour or so. And you might want to take really good notes as well, because that's the person who is going to be reading your applications when you're applying. If that sounds good, let's get started. Let's talk about the GMAT. Now, I know some of you have mentioned that you are just starting. So I want to make sure that we are all on the same page about what's really tested on the GMAT. Now, you would notice that there are 4 sections on the GMAT. And when I ask people in class, especially in a live class, we teach a lot of live classes in person, or until recently, and we've done this for many years. We've actually been teaching GMAT classes since 1998, right? So over 20 years. So I ask people, well, what's really tested on the GMAT? And most people are going to say, well, there's math. And I think that what they mean is they refer to the quantitative reasoning section. There's also English. And what they really mean is the verbal reasoning section. There's an essay that for some reason a lot of people are scared about, which is the analytical writing assessment, the easiest section on the GMAT. And there's also integrated reasoning, a section that's been around for the last 8 years. So it's the newest section of the GMAT. Now, I'd like to invite you to notice that the names of these sections don't actually contain math or English. The sections that contribute towards your total score are the quantitative reasoning and the verbal reasoning sections. They're all about reasoning. They're all about demonstrating these reasoning skills. They're all about thinking differently. And if you were to draw some parallels, essentially they're all about using the managerial skills to make decisions about finding an answer. We'll do some problem solving and some data sufficiency questions, so they can actually see what's involved. Now, that actually brings us to a question is, what kinds of questions am I going to see on these sections? Well, in the quantitative reasoning section, which you can think of this section not as math. Please stop thinking about this as math. Instead, I'd like to invite you to think about this section as the reasoning section with some numbers involved. You're going to see, number 1, problem-solving questions, and number 2, data sufficiency questions. Now, in problem-solving questions, what do you think you would need to do? You can please put things in the chat box. What do you think you need to do in a problem-solving question? Well, thanks for sharing. Most of you are saying solve a problem, solve an equation, create an equation. And one person said, you've read my mind, and that is find an answer. Now, find an answer and solve a problem is a different way of thinking. It's a slightly different shift that you would have to do if you want to do really well on the GMAT. So problem solving is all about finding an answer. By the way, where would you find an answer? Can somebody tell me, where would you find an answer? Just please put this in the chat box. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You'll find the answer in front of you. The answer is right there. All you need to do is find it. Now, finding an answer sometimes will involve writing out an equation, sometimes not. Now, the data sufficiency is an even more interesting question. I hope you're as excited as I am, because I'm so excited for you, because I've been doing this for many years. You're just getting into this. There's so many great things you can learn. And a data sufficiency question is a question where you don't need to find an answer. Can you believe that? Not only you don't need to solve a problem, you don't even need to find an answer. All you need is figure out if the information you have in front of you is enough to find the answer. How's that? That's a real managerial problem, right? Figure out if it's possible to do it, and then get other people working on it, right? Just like Elon Musk. Figure out if it's possible to send the rocket into space, let other people, the engineers, do it. Your job is done. The data sufficiency problem is complete. It's possible to do it. Here's what I need. I need an engineer, and I need some really good rockets. That's it. That's what you're gonna do in data sufficiency. And we'll look at some questions today. The verbal reasoning section, number one, sentence correction. So what's sentence correction all about? Well, you may have heard that sentence correction is about the English grammar. And absolutely, you gotta know some English grammar. Not a lot of it, actually, just a very small part. So if English is not your first language, don't worry. In fact, all of the English grammar that you need to learn in our class, we cover in about 4 hours. Okay, that's the entire English grammar, and we focus a lot on the actual process of doing the questions, but not too much, not too much. But the most important thing in sentence correction is your attention to detail, right? And you might be thinking, well, attention to detail, what kind of a skill is that? Is that something that you either have or you don't have? Right? But just like any skill, attention to detail is something that anybody can develop. Nobody is born with attention to detail, I can tell you. But kids, I have a 3-year-old at home, do not have a good attention to detail. Over time, they've developed it. And just like any skill, it's possible to develop it. Right? So we can work on that if you join our class for about 6 or 12 weeks. Now, critical reasoning is all about knowing what to look for and knowing how to read efficiently. So is reading comprehension. It's all about knowing what is important in the passage and what is not important. If you've done any reading comprehension passages so far, you already know they are quite overwhelming, and many people really hate them. But I can tell you, for me personally, reading comprehension is one of my most favorite parts, because also I almost never make mistakes in reading comprehension. Right? Sometimes I would still make an odd mistake in the sentence correction, the critical reason. Reading comprehension, almost without exception, I get every single question right, because I know what to look for. And that's also something that's possible to learn. So that's a really quick overview of what to expect in the most important sections of the GMAT. Now, if you are going to do the online at-home GMAT, which is available right now until August 14th, the date will probably be extended into September and potentially maybe even till the end of this year, then there's actually not going to be an essay. So the quant and the verbal is a 2-hour section combined, and the integrate reason is just half an hour. So it's 75% of your exam or 80% of your exam, right? So this is the most important part. We will talk about the verbal reasoning section if you decide to join us in 3 weeks. But today, let's talk about quant. Now, I want to begin with asking you a question. And I'll actually just do a really quick poll, because I'd love to hear your opinion on this. And that is the GMAT Math hard? I'm going to give you about a minute to choose an answer. And you can choose all of them, whichever ones you think appeal to you. Just choose why you think the math is hard. And if you think it's not hard, there's actually an option there in the poll to say it's not hard, it's easy. All right, well, thanks very much for answering again. You can keep answering, but I'm just gonna tell you, very, very few people, actually just one person said it's not hard. And I wanna qualify my answer here a little bit. Sometimes it's how you ask a question is the kind of an answer that you're going to get, right? So is the math on the GMAT hard? And the answer is no. The math on the GMAT is not hard. So what you see right now on the screen, all of these logarithms and all of these tangents and cotangents, you're never going to see this on the GMAT. So the math on the GMAT is not hard. What makes the questions hard is they're tricky, right? So imagine this. Imagine math is like running on an enclosed indoor track where everything is tightly controlled and you know exactly how the ground is going to be like, you know, the exact temperature when you're running on this track, right? So this is math. This is straightforward math. This is in fact how most people train for this challenge. But then imagine having to run a marathon, but on a trail where things go up and down, where there's some fallen branches and some rivers that perhaps washed out the road. Well, the skill of running is still the same, but it's not as straightforward. It's so much more tricky, it's so much more treacherous, and you have to run for a much longer time. So that's what makes the GMAT difficult. And also you're getting more tired and the questions on the GMAT get harder, right? So the trail, the difficulty of the trail gets harder and harder. So thanks so much for sharing your responses. Most of you have said it's a time pressure. It's been a while since you did this type of math. So let's review some of the basic math. And I think you'll be surprised to learn how elementary is the basic math. But again, we know that for now it's just a foundation, right? Before you run a treacherous trail, you gotta maybe practice a little bit indoors when you know exactly how the track is going to look like. So let's review this sort of math. I want to talk about the things that are so basic that we've probably learned them in grade 1. But I'd like to invite you to still take notes because grade 1 and grade 2 means it's been a while ago, for most of us a really long while. And secondly, this area, believe it or not, is the largest tested area on the GMAT. It's not algebra, it's not equations, it's numbers. So let's talk about numbers. Just a little bit of a historical digression. People used numbers for thousands of years. In fact, these are the kinds of numbers that people started using a really long time ago when they lived in caves. And then eventually they said, well, that's not enough. We need some shortcuts. So they started drawing some shortcuts, like, for example, the V was 5 and the X was 10, and you can add or subtract, and this is how you can come up with larger numbers. If you go to Europe, on some of the older buildings, you're going to see these numbers because Europeans didn't really know any different numbers until approximately 11th century. In fact, they haven't adopted these numbers, they haven't used them widely until the 15th or 16th century. It took a really long time for them to adopt. There was no internet at that time. But these are the numbers we use today. And these are the numbers that Europeans started using in the 1500s. And what was interesting is this were a real breakthrough in technology, probably more than a TV or an iPhone, because for the first time in history, people started using a zero. There was no zero. And also for the first time in history, Europeans discovered what are decimal numbers. There were no decimal numbers in Roman numerals. There was no zero as well. So the numbers that we use today are all comprised of digits. We have digits from 0 to 9, and this creates all of these numbers, any numbers that we actually use in our everyday life. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. If you can please put things in a chat box. I'm really curious. If I were to think of a number, so I promise not to cheat, and I see your names here in the chat. So I'm going to think of a number between 1 and, how about 1 and 20? So 1 and 20. And if you could tell me what my number is, I know your name, I'm going to send you a free math book for free. I'm going to ship it to you. If you can figure out what my number is. I promise not to cheat. Between 1 and 20. As some of you are saying, I'm going to keep trying. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right. Now, so far, nobody got this number. Now, let me share with you a little something. I've been playing this game in my classes for, well, probably, at least 5 years. That book is still on my desk. What's the chance of guessing a number between 1 and 20? Let me ask you a question. How many numbers are there between 1 and 20? Realistically, if we got, 80 people here on this call, and the numbers are 1 to 20. Yeah, some of you are catching on this, with or without decimals, exactly. Well, how many numbers are there between 1 and 20? All of us thought about integers, but I actually never mentioned that my number is integers. Of course, it was not a fair game because we have a lot of numbers that are non-integers, and these are called, well, non-integers. Some of them are rational, which means they could be represented as a fraction. Some of them are irrational, which is something like a square root of 2 or a number pi. And they fit all this space in between the integers. So if you think about all of these numbers, we have an infinite number of numbers even between 0 and 1, because we have all of these non-integers that fill up the space. So that's really important because the GMAT is going to try to trick us into thinking the number has to be an integer if it's not. In fact, there was a question on the GMAT. There was a data sufficiency question where one statement said x is more than 9, and the other statement said x is less than 11. And the question was, what is x? And many people think that x is 10. And they choose an answer C, which means both statements are sufficient. But of course, they're not, because we have 10.1, 10.2, 10.3. So be careful, but not make your own assumptions. If the GMAT doesn't say something, we can't really assume that this is true. All right. Now, before we move off from this, I just want to say that this number line is the line that represents all of the numbers that are going to show up on the GMAT. You may have heard of numbers that are not real, something like an imaginary number or a complex number. If you've taken calculus in grades 11 and 12, or maybe in university, you've learned of these numbers, multidimensional numbers, essentially. They do not show up on the GMAT. Remember, almost everything from secondary school. The only real numbers, they all show up on the number line. In fact, number line is a very useful tool. You would see me drawing out a number line very often, especially if I'm dealing with an inequality or an absolute value question. So these questions tend to be tricky. Now, speaking about an absolute value, what is an absolute value actually? Well, what's an absolute value of, if you can just put things in the chat box, what's an absolute value of 7? An absolute value of 7 is 7, perfect. And what's an absolute value of minus 4? Minus 4. All right, perfect. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's 4. All right, let's do a couple more. What's an absolute value of x? Absolute value of x is? All right, most of you are saying x. Actually, everybody's saying x. And what's an absolute value of minus x? All right, well, everybody's saying x. All right, well, let's test this strategy. So what I hear from almost everybody here is an absolute value of x is equal to x, and an absolute value of minus x is equal to x. Well, let's pick some numbers. Let's actually see if this is going to work. Can you give me a number just so that we can test this? Just give me any value for x in the chat box. All right, yeah, so great. So some of you are saying 3. Well, an absolute value of 3 is indeed 3. So that's good, everything works. And Giovanni is saying an absolute value of minus 28. What's an absolute value of minus 28? Well, if an absolute value of x is x, then an absolute value of minus 28 should be minus 28. right? But it's not. An absolute value of minus 28 is 28. So what's an absolute value of x? Well, it could be x, it could be minus x. But we were so quick at jumping that it's x, sometimes we need to stop and think a little. And that's how the GMAT is going to, again, try to trick us. Remember, this is a treacherous trail that we're running. We got to be careful. We need to know what to look out for. And again, if you're running that trail for the first time, it's going to be really challenging. But if you've done that a while, if you know what to look for, if you know of all of these traps and distractions, then you know next time, here's what I'm going to remember. Numbers don't have to be integers. Numbers don't have to be positive unless the GMAT told me. Right? So quick lesson learned. You might want to write this down. Now, let's go back to our numerical system. Now, this numerical system was a real breakthrough because we can now create very large numbers very quickly. All we need to do is write down the digits next to each other, and all of a sudden we have 6,000. We don't have to figure out all these X and Y and B and C and D with Roman numerals. So confusing. Everybody knows exactly what this number is. Right? And how do we know exactly what this number is? Because when we read this number, we would say, so this is 6,482. Notice how we read this number. We say 6,000. So what this means is that 6 represents how many thousands we have in a number, and 4 represents how many hundreds. So that is why every digit in the number will take a certain place, the thousands place and the hundreds place. And if you ever forget what is the place, just read this number out loud and you'll know exactly what that is, right? A little brain trick, life hack. And on the other side, we have tenths, which is, like, if you were to count this as change, there would be dimes, and hundreds, which would be pennies. So this is actually very useful. Now you might be thinking, well, why do I need to know this? Well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, the GMAT will actually refer to the places of these digits by name. So the GMAT might say, well, what's in the hundreds digit? What's in the tens digit? And another thing they might do is they might give you some problems where they're going to do some things with the number. And I'll show you in a moment one of the questions that they could actually give you where they're going to do some things with the number. But I just wanted to maybe show you a more mathematical way of breaking that question down. We talked about more of a verbal reasoning way, 6,000. But essentially what this means is that in this number, we have 6 times 1,000 plus 4 times 100 plus 8 times 10. So that's how we break the number down. And we can do that very quickly. And if you're comfortable with equations, if you like algebra, then you can very quickly isolate any specific digit. So if the GMAT asks you, what's the hundredths digit or what's the tens digit? Well, you can do that because you can pull it out because you know what's that multiplier, what's that quotient, right? Like you know that 4 isn't just 4, it's 4 times 100. Well, let's see how we can apply this on the GMAT question. So here's the question. I am actually going to be quiet for probably about 45 seconds because I'd like you to give you some time to think about this question and actually choose an answer. I'm going to again launch a poll just like we've done before so that you can choose an answer that you think, in your opinion, is the best. Fifteen more seconds. All right, so with about half of the people voting, the most popular answer is A, which actually about half of the people who did vote chose A. And then E was about a quarter. Actually, you know what, let me share this with you so that you could see how. So by the majority vote, the answer is A, therefore, there's gotta be the right answer, right? That's how things work. We have a democracy, so with the majority of votes, that's what we're gonna pick. Well, let's see. Let's see if we actually got this right. Let's look at a couple of ways of doing this question. Again, let's talk about the theory way, which is essentially just knowing a little bit of math. One of the things that we can do is we could say, well, look, geez, I have these two numbers, they're two-digit positive integers, but I don't really know what these numbers are. If I knew the numbers, for example, if I knew that the numbers are 23 and 32, I can add them up and I can get an answer. So because I don't know what the numbers are, maybe I'm just gonna try things out. So how about 23 plus 32? Well, that's 55. That's a little too small. So maybe I need to take some other numbers. How about 25 and 52? Well, okay, so that's 77, still too small. So how about 27 and 72? So that's 99. Now, at this point, most people are going to say, I got 99. 99 is right in front of me. I found it. The answer is A. But if you read carefully, the question was actually asking, all of these could be the answers except for one. So 99 isn't the right answer because it works. We need to find the one that doesn't work because of that word except. So we'll eliminate A and we'll keep going. We have more numbers to test. So we'll keep finding these pairs of numbers until we test all 5. And that, of course, is going to take a while. So we need a better strategy. Well, one of the things that we can do is remember what we've just done. We've just said that if you have a two-digit number, let's say 3 and 2, so 32, all this means it's 3 times 10 plus 2, right? So 32 is 30 plus 2, and 52 is 50 plus 2. So if I don't know what the digits are, but I'm comfortable with some really elementary algebra, I could say my number S would be the digit X and the digit Y. So X tells us how many tens and Y tells us how many units. And T is going to be that number in reverse. And what this really means is that X tells us how many tens there are in a number, and Y tells us how many units. So S would be 10x plus Y. Again, if it's 32, it's going to be 10 times 3 plus 2. We can try on some smaller numbers. And T is going to be 23, which is going to be 10 times 2 plus 3. So again, it works. And we can try on some smaller numbers. So the formula works. That's great. The question was about the sum. So let's add them up. S plus T is going to be that thing for S and that thing for T. And if we were to add them up, now we have what? How many x's? We have 10x from S and y from T. So we got 11 x's and 11 y's. And again, if you're comfortable with some basic elementary algebra, you can get to this formula, which is S plus T is going to be simply 11 times x plus y. We can isolate, we can factor out 11 because that's what they have in common. And then we'll have x plus y in brackets. All right, so that gives us an interesting insight because we've essentially broken the number down into its digits, into its parts. And what we found is that S plus T has got to be a multiple of 11. It's got to be divisible by 11. X plus y are digits. So that number we know is a whole number. So S plus T will be some multiple of 11. All we have to do right now is figure out which of the answer choices is not a multiple of 11, right? Remember, we're looking for an exception. Well, A, B, C, and D are all multiples of 11, and only E is not. And that's got to be our right answer. And we can actually do this in 1 minute. So if you did do this, congratulations. Now, how do I know which of the answer choices are multiples of 11? We'll get to this in a moment. Don't worry. How did we know this so quickly? But I want to show you, again, a slightly higher level of doing this question. And that is finding an answer and noticing things that other people don't notice because, again, they know what to look for. Here's what we're going to do. Look at the answer choices. And we've noticed that we need to look for an exception. There's a pattern in the answer choices. Even if we don't understand why this pattern is there, we would notice, again, if we know what to look for, that 4 answer choices are multiples of 11 and only 1 is not. Right? There's a pattern. There's a fairly clear pattern that we can notice here. We are looking for an outlier. E is an outlier. So we're going to pick E. That's an exception. And we can do this in 30 seconds. I was talking to one of our clients just yesterday who made a very interesting comment. And she basically said, well, the GMAT is easy if you know what you're doing. And it's hard if you don't. And that's just like many things in life. Right? The math on the GMAT isn't actually very hard. All you need is understand what's a multiple of 11 and some really elementary algebra. I hope that you're starting to see this by now. Now, let's go back to our division. We've said we need to somehow really quickly figure out which of these numbers are multiples of 11. So for that, we need to understand a little bit of divisibility rules. Let me ask you a question. If I want to understand whether 132 is divisible by 3, what do you think? Is 132 divisible by 3? Please put it in the chat box. Yes, absolutely. Okay, everybody's saying yes. Great, you're multiples of 2. All we need to do is add the digits, 1 plus 3 plus 2. That's 6. 6 is divisible by 3, so 132 is divisible by 3. Well, how about this? Is 873 divisible by 9? Yes or no? Okay, some of you are saying yes, some of you are saying no. Let's test this. What's 8 plus 7 plus 3? So we add up all the digits, we get 18. 18 is divisible by 9. If the sum of the digits is divisible by 9, the number itself is divisible by 9. So 873 is divisible by 9. Oh, that's great. That's an amazing strategy, right? So let's use this strategy on something else. How about, is 34 divisible by 7? Well, that means 3 plus 4. So we have 2 digits. 3 plus 4 is 7. So 7 is divisible by 7. So technically, 34 should be divisible by 7, right? Yes? No? Okay, you're saying no. No. This strategy works for some division. It doesn't work for some other. In fact, it just works for 3 and 9. But the good news that every single digit will have a divisibility rule. And these divisibility rules are going to be in the cheat sheet you'll receive by email tomorrow. So tomorrow morning, because we know that you came here, we are going to send you some free resources, essentially like a gift basket. They're going to be virtual resources. And one of them is going to be the math cheat sheet. And you're going to find all of these divisibility rules in the cheat sheet, including the one I want to talk about right now. And that is division by 11. Now, the majority of the cheat sheets out there that you can find, even in many of the GMAT books, will go up to 10. What does the GMAT do? Test division by 11. Right? The GMAT always tries to go a little above and beyond. So if you know what the GMAT is trying to do, well, you go up to 11. So let's talk about division by 11. Now, oh, and by the way, somebody was asking, is the pattern in the earlier question coincidence? Absolutely not. Now, the patterns would be different in different answers. But in this case, it was absolutely not a coincidence because we're looking for an exception. There had to be a pattern, right? So looking for patterns is really important. But remember, the patterns are going to be different. So you got to know different patterns. And also just train your eye to look for these patterns. All right, so let's talk about division by 11. Well, these numbers are very easy. We can, you've probably learned the strategies. But what if we have this number? Is this number divisible by 11? What do you think? Is this number divisible by 11? All right, some of you are saying no, some of you are saying yes. We don't have a calculator, and I certainly do not want to divide it. So what I'm going to do is use the division rule. And the division rule or divisibility rule by 11 is going to look like this. I'm going to add up the digits, but I will start from the units digit, the last digit, and then I'm going to split the number this way. So I'm going to alternate the digits. I'm going to add all of the alternating digits starting from the last one, starting from 9. So I'm going to skip one digit as we go along, and I'll add them up, and I'm going to get 19. Now, I'm not quite done yet because I haven't counted all of the digits. I'll then count all the remaining ones, and I'm going to get an 8. And then all I need to do is subtract one from the other. In this case, 19 minus 8, 11. As long as I get here a number that's a multiple of 11 or 0, either one's okay. Well, 0, by the way, is a multiple of 11, just to be very straightforward. So as long as I get a 0, any sort of a multiple of 11, then the original number is also a multiple of 11. So that's the divisibility rule, right? And you can use this on any number. It works 100% of the time. In fact, one of the questions on the GMAT a few years ago asked you to figure out whether a number with 50 digits was divisible by 11. Imagine 50 digits. You can't even write that number down. By using this rule, it was really easy because there was a pattern. And you can figure this out really quickly. And that number was a multiple of 11 because the sum of the digits, by knowing the pattern, you can figure out that the first set minus the second set was actually 0. It works for any number. It works for big numbers, works for small numbers. This strategy works really well for bigger numbers. Obviously, if the number is 33, we don't have to do this because we already know it's divisible by 11. All right, so there's a little bit of a preview of arithmetic. I want to also, before we move out, it would work I want to talk about algebra as well as geometry. So again, I know some of you are asking questions, does it work all the time? Yeah, absolutely, it works all the time. It works for every, now sometimes there are patterns. For example, 33, we know it's a multiple of 11. Also, 3, 3, 3, 3, as long as we have an even number of digits that are all the same, it's also a multiple of 11. Yeah, so there's some shortcuts, but this strategy works 100% of the time on any number. Now, let's talk about algebra. And I know many people are really scared of algebra. Some people love algebra. Some people hate algebra. And what I found, most people don't really like algebra, but they don't really know of another way of doing problems. So they kind of put up with algebra. They just, I don't like it, but I have to do it. Right? And one of the interesting things is that you don't have to use algebra as often. In fact, it's not even half of the exam, but it does show up. And if I were to simplify algebra for us, I would say that the difference between arithmetic and algebra is this. Let me give you a really quick example. We have two people, Alice and Bobby, who like apples. Alice ate 5 and Bobby ate 3. Together, they had 8. All I need to do is an arithmetic operation, 5 plus 3. Well, algebra would be something like this. Alice has 5 apples and Bobby has some unknown number of apples. Together they have 8. How many did Bobby eat? So usually we assign some sort of an X. But there's some other things we can do, like maybe we can just try some answers. There are different strategies. But that's how the algebra would work. We would generally assign X to something we don't know, something we're looking for, and eventually we'll find it out. And usually we do this by building an equation. So here's for an example of a linear equation. Why it's linear? Because we do not multiply variables onto other variables. So as long as you have one equation, one linear equation with one variable, you can find the X. And we'll do this, just in case you forgot, by using the number one algebra tool, and that is keep the equation in balance. Right? Remember, that's an equation. So two sides are equal. Don't make them not equal. Keep them equal. That means whatever you got to do to one side, you have to do exactly the same thing to the other side. Speaking about our equation that we just talked about, the first thing that we would do is subtract 5 from both sides. So we'll get rid of that 5. So we'll have 3x is equal to 9. And then, of course, again, we'll do the same thing to both sides, which is divide both sides by 3, and we'll have x is equal to 3. What we've just done, we've successfully isolated the x, and that is what you would very normally need to do in questions such as this. So make sure you're comfortable isolating a variable. Make sure that you know your order of operations. In Canada, called the BEDMAS. In the United States, called the PEMDAS. Whatever you call it, the order of operations is you know what to start with. You do multiplication and division, then you do addition, subtraction, and so on, right? And the brackets and the exponents. So that's equations. That's like half of algebra. Another half of algebra is inequalities. In fact, equations are more common in problem solving. Inequality is a little more common in data sufficiency. And inequalities, the idea, the principle of inequality is still the same. You got two sides. Most often, sometimes you have 3, but two sides that are not equal, right? And the good news is that we still have two sides. So we could normally do the same thing we want to both sides, and the equations would still, or the inequality would still be the same, right? So if 2 is more than 1, we can add 1 to 2 and 1 to 1, and now 3 is still more than 2. So usually, that's what we need to do, and nothing's going to change. However, there's an exception to this rule about inequalities. You may have heard about this exception. Does anybody know what is an exception? If I were to do something with both sides of the equation, the inequality is not going to be the same anymore. Does anybody know what that exception is? So it has to do with the signs. You're absolutely right. If we're multiplying or dividing both sides by a negative number, we need to reverse the sign. For example, here in this inequality, if we were to divide both sides by -3, we would be reversing the sign, and instead of x now being less than -2, it's more than -2. And so that's an exception. Keep that in mind. All right, well, I feel like I've been talking for a while now about some of the concepts in the theory. Let's put them to practice. Let's do a data sufficiency question. Now, if you've never seen a data sufficiency question before, you're gonna see one now. Here's how it's gonna look like. You have a question, and you don't need to answer this question. All you need to do is figure out if the information in statement 1 or statement 2 or together is necessary in order to answer this question. The 5 answer choices are always the same. They're right here in front of you, and they essentially just different choices of what statements would I need in order to answer this question. Right? So how would I know whether x is more than 2y? Do I need to know information from statement 1 in order to do this? Do I need to know information from statement 2 in order to do this? Maybe either one of them is sufficient, or maybe I need them both. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to figure that out, and then we'll see how you did. Again, we're focusing here on what information is necessary for us. And if you haven't really done much data sufficiency, don't worry about the answer choices. Just focus on what statement would I need in order to answer this question. Do I need statement 1? Do I need statement 2? Or do I need them both? Ten more seconds. All right. So as you could see, by the majority vote, the right answer is D. And then we have B, A, actually C, and E. So quite a good distribution of different opinions here. Let's see what we can do. Now, let's talk about, again, different ways of approaching this question. So what do we know in terms of the theory? Well, okay. So if we look at statement 1, x divided by y is more than 2. So that means that x is more than 2y. That should be sufficient, right? We just multiply both sides by y. Let's look at statement 2. Well, if x minus 2y is less than 0, then x is less than 2y. So that should be not sufficient, because the question was, is it more than 2y? And that means that the answer is A. Statement 1 is sufficient, statement 2 is not. And unfortunately, this is not the right answer. We'll find out in a moment why. Well, let's talk about maybe a different way of doing this question. Let's talk about the strategy way. Let's look at statement 1 again. If x is divided by y is more than 2, then x is more than 2y, and that should be sufficient. But statement 2, what we can do is, well, we can add 2y to both sides, and that means x is less than 2y. So knowing that x is less than 2y is actually sufficient, because we can answer the question, right? The answer in data sufficient does not have to be a yes answer, it could be a no answer. So that should also be sufficient. So that means the answer is D, right? Unfortunately not. Where did things go wrong? Well, let's look at the mastery way of doing this question. You remember about half an hour ago, we talked about absolute values. And we talked about the fact that an absolute value of x doesn't have to be x, because x could be a negative number. We also just talked about the fact that if you multiply or divide both sides by a negative number, then we might have to flip the sign. Well, let me ask you a question. When we were multiplying both sides by y in statement 1, do we have to flip the sign or not? No? Well, maybe. We don't know. Exactly. We don't know, because we don't know what is y. We were not told whether y is positive or negative. We kind of assumed that it's positive, but it could be negative. And in fact, if it's positive, we don't flip the sign. If it's negative, we do. That means that statement 1 gives us 2 different answers, and we don't really know which one is right. You're absolutely right. We've assumed, but we were never told. And by the way, if you want to write this down, just put up your pen and write it down in the red color. I promise to never make my own assumptions on the GMAT. Sometimes you have to find somebody else's assumption, but don't ever make your own assumptions. So 2 answers not sufficient. Statement 2 actually would be sufficient, because we do not add, we do not multiply or divide, we add. So we always are going to get x is less than 2y. So the answer is always no. It is sufficient, and the answer is indeed B. All we have to do is be careful, remember the flip sign rule, and remember to not make assumptions. We did not know what y is. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this. I want to do one more geometry question. And I'll pick out the question to show you the different ways of approaching this question. And that's a question from one of the online forums. And I want to show you how this kind of online forum, I'm not going to say the name of this forum, but how one of the online forums, there was an explanation that was written actually there in this forum by one of the instructors who actually explained to do the question this way. I'm going to show you this explanation. So here's the question. We have a radius of a circle is decreased by 20%. What will be the percentage change of the area of this circle? And if that's going to help you, I'm going to show you the picture. And I'll give you about 30 seconds to try to figure out what the answer is. 10 more seconds. All right. So I could tell you we have a tie between C and D. B is the close third, and then we also have some people for E. Now, let me show you how the GMAT forum actually explained this. And this was taken from one of the online classes. It was recommended actually on this GMAT forum. So here's what it says. The area is equal to pi r squared. And then what we're going to do is we'll say, OK, so we have the new r, which is 8/10 of an r. And then we have a new area. And then we have a percent change. And then you look at this formula, you just need to do some manipulations. I'm cleaning up. And eventually you find the answer. So if you know what you're doing, the actual explanation, there was an explanation to this question. The actual explanation took 2 minutes. There was a video. It literally took 2 minutes to explain and work through all of this. If you know exactly what you're doing, it took 2 minutes or 3 minutes. So I want to show you a different way of doing this question. And I could tell you, I make a little bit of a confession, right? So I'm a GMAT instructor, and so my wife, she's not a math person, right? She's she's an amazing person, but she's not a math person. So sometimes when I show her the questions, I'm gonna test things on her. So if I can explain to her in 30 seconds how to do the question, and if she really gets it, and then I give her another question just like this, and she can apply it and do it right, then I know it's a good strategy. Right? She's really smart. She's not just not a math person. So let me show you how I explain this question to her. So I'll say, okay, well, we have the area is equal to pi r squared, and yeah, we remember that. We have 2 circles. So let's just think about this from a very practical perspective. How's, if we imagine that an old radius was 10, so the old area was pi r squared, which is 100 pi. And now what would be the new radius? Well, it's gonna be 8. So the new area is going to be 8 times 8, which is 64, times pi. So that's 64 pi. So what's the percentage change? What's the decrease from 100 to 64? That's 36%, right? We're done. We can do this in 30 seconds. And I literally explained this in 30 seconds. I gave her another question that's very similar to this concept, and she did it herself in under a minute. So we can do this 30 seconds. Very little math, we can get this question right. And that again just talks about the fact that it's not really about math, right? It's really all about thinking differently. It's about training yourself or getting somebody to train you how to think differently about these problems, right? There is a way. If you're not a math person, there's absolutely a way to do really well on the test by just reshifting the mind a little bit. And unfortunately, the problem is that most of us have not learned this way before, right? And so this is a really great opportunity for us to learn. And just like I mentioned, it's also very unfortunate, in my opinion, that the majority of the GMAT resources and even many online classes and kind of self-prep courses and forums are designed by people who are math teachers or math instructors. We have a lot of people applying to work for us as GMAT instructors, and 95% of them are math teachers or have math background, right? So when I give them questions to do and I see them doing math, well, unfortunately, we reject them. We have to have people who are really thinking beyond the math, right? And that is why the majority of the discussions on the online forums, they're very targeted towards people who know math. And there's a math way of doing the problem, right? And I think we've talked about this at the beginning. Do you think the GMAT should give an advantage to people who are really strong with math? Is that really what the test is about? Not really, right? It's really all about thinking differently. So how do we get there? How do we get to this way of thinking? Now, first of all, what level do we need to get to? We have JD that's just joined us, so thanks so much, JD. He's going to share in a few moments with you what is actually required to get into a school, but I would just want to show you some samples of some schools from the United States and a few schools from Canada, the kinds of scores that you would need in order to get in. Right? So as you could see, they're fairly high percentile scores, and the average score in the GMAT that people get worldwide is 560. And I know many of you are joining from Canada. In the United States, it's about the same in North America. In Latin America, the average is also about the same, depending on the country, could be a little lower, a little higher. And if you're thinking of getting 700, well, that's 80th percentile. So let me ask you a question, just so we understand the percentiles. What percent of people would get scored of 700 or more? So sometimes that's how we can define success, right? How many people get 700 get scores of 700 or more? What do you think? Just please put things in the chat box. What percent? Okay, yeah, some of you are saying 20%, some of you are saying 12%. Well, the percentile essentially means how many people you beat, right? So 700 means you beat 88% of people. I have a different answer to this question, and my answer is 0.3%. And I'll tell you how I arrive at that answer, because again, the question was actually tricky. And I'm playing these tricks with you so that hopefully I could show you what to look out for. Because when we talk about the percent of people, I didn't really say percent of what people. I could say percent of people who did the GMAT, in which case it will be 12%. I could talk about percent of people who were studying for the GMAT, but some of them didn't actually end up doing the test. Or I can talk about everybody in the world, the entire 8 billion people. Okay. So I'd like to use the percent of people who begin studying for the GMAT. I'm going to show you some official statistics from MBA.com. So every year, 7 million people go on MBA.com looking for the GMAT. Of them, 2 million people are going to register, create an account because they probably want to do the test. Of them, only 200,000 people, 10% will actually do the test every year, and only 24,000 people get scored of 700. So if everybody who is thinking of doing the GMAT, thinking of doing an MBA, 0.3% will actually get 700 plus, and 99.7% either won't do the test at all, or they will do the test, but they'll get scores that are not very high. Right, so these people begin studying, at least they do some research. Certainly the 2 million people begin studying because they create an account, they download resources. So why does this happen? One of the big reasons is that the way we study, and we kind of talked about this already, but how do we normally study? Well, we've studied before, right? We studied for an exam. We've done exams before. I know I've been guilty of studying that way in my university. I just hit the books and review what I need. My exam's tomorrow, right? Or my exam's in a week. So I'm gonna review. I'm gonna load up on books. Maybe I'll pick up these books. There's 3 of them, or maybe these books, there are 10. Or maybe I just need to crack the GMAT. Or maybe I just need the latest and greatest, right? This book was written by one of our instructors. So good books. Every book is good in its own way. But what many people do is they completely overwhelm themselves with books. And you already know by now, it's not about the theory. Right? It's not about reading a book on driving. But we were taught, again, and just to come back to this, that knowledge is power. Essentially, what our teachers in secondary school and high school told us, that if we want to learn how to swim, all we need to do is sit in a class neatly in rows and read a book on swimming. That's it. Right? That's what we're being told. And of course, jumping into a pool, hopefully with somebody who knows how to swim, and ideally getting some coaching, as you can only imagine, that's what's going to lead to results. Now, you might be saying, what is Sergey saying? He's trying to criticize our school system. Well, I'm not. I'm a victim. No, I am a product of our school system. But I want to give you a quote from Andrew Carnegie that was written in 1908, so over 100 years ago, who said that people go to school to learn abstract knowledge, but nobody in school taught them how to use it. How is it applicable to their everyday life? How is it going to get them to be more successful? Essentially, nobody taught us how to get from reading a book on driving to get to drive a sports car. Certainly nobody in school. So how do we do this? Well, there's a process. Again, you may want to write this down. There's a step-by-step process of doing really well on the GMAT. Or in any sort of a skill. Now, here is the process. Step number one is we have to learn some theory. That's why when you learn how to drive, you read a handbook first. When you starting to study for the GMAT, the first thing you want to do is review this theory. Now, in this case, it is really review because you've done it before, but also make sure you practice applying it. So if you say, well, I know how to add two fractions, I would immediately say, well, here are some two fractions. Try to add them up. And I'm going to give you some harder ones because I want to make sure you can really do this. And you don't just know the theory, but you know how to apply it. That's why what we do with our students, and I know some of you are already in our class, or you're starting this Saturday, then the first step that we've suggested we do, and we give you this resource where you just work on these adaptive online exercises. Essentially, you're just applying this strategy over and over again as the questions get harder, so that you could come to the class and say, I know how to add two fractions and I've done it. I'm ready to learn some of the more advanced things. And that's going to be like joining a driving class with an instructor. Right? So the training, the sort of a training that's really now start to focus on the skill is going to be different than just reading a book. It's going to be about learning the actual strategies of doing the GMAT in a very, very structured setting. Of course, getting some feedback because everybody makes mistakes at first. And the trick here, and the most important part that many people miss, it is you gotta learn this best strategies up front. Because if you practice a lot, you may have heard practice makes perfect. That's actually not exactly true. Practice makes permanent. Practice becomes a habit. If you keep practicing over and over and over again, that becomes a habit. And we fall into habits when we go for the real test. When we are stressed out, we always fall back into habits. So if you have good habits, you're going to do exceptionally well. If you have bad habits, then the test might be potentially a disaster. So it's really important to learn these strategies up front. That's why in our program, it's a 6-week program, or you can take it in 12 weeks if you have less time in a week. During this time, you learn these strategies, and then you continue practicing, you continue reinforcing these habits until you feel that your habits are enough for you to get whatever score you want. And it could be 700, could be 760, could be 680. You will decide what you need. And that's why this program that we offer is actually very unique, because we're going to ask you what score you want, and then we'll chart the plan for you of exactly how to get there, and we'll continue supporting you until you are done. Right? So it's a little bit of a different way to learn, because we can track very precisely where you are right now and where you need to be. Right? So many people, when they hear about this, they'll say, wow, I didn't know this sort of a training even exists, because usually, I just get an account, I keep practicing, and then I don't know I'm improving, and maybe take some practice tests. But this is the full immersion at first for 6 to 12 weeks, and then, so 10 or 20 hours a week, depending on whether you take it 6 or 12 weeks. And then you just continue practicing, continue support until you are done. It's a very unique program, and a lot of our students will then go on to some top schools in Canada and around the world. That's why our reputation is really, really important. So we don't take everybody in our class. We want to make sure that when you come to our class, you're really serious about getting good results. It's a fairly small class, so we can be selective of who come to the class, and it's going to be for your benefit as well. You want to make sure you're in class with hardworking people who are ready to work hard and work smart. You don't have to be book smart, you have to be street smart to do this. You got to know how to make good decisions. That's really what it's all about. And from our side, we'll support you as long as it takes. And now for most people, it takes about 2 to 3 months, but we'll be supporting you up to 18 months. That's the time we're going to give you to finish the whole thing, because we want you to stay on track. So there'll be structure, accountability, there'll be some tutoring sessions included as well. And we have some very special offers, right? I'm not here to sell you on a course, so it's you decide if you want to continue with us, if you want to learn these strategies. You can go on this website, admitmaster.com/offer. We have a course that's starting in 5 days, so the price for this course is already the regular price, but the first person who registers for this course, we're going to give you $100 off. And I'm also going to show you one little something that we're going to do as well. And then the course in August, we still have a few days for you to save $200, which is our maximum early bird discount. Now, we've mostly been teaching our classes in person. And when this COVID hit, we said, well, really, how do we continue supporting our clients? So what we've done is we've actually outfit our classroom where you're going to get front seat in our class. The instructor is going to be in the class, and the instructor has a big screen TV that takes up the whole front seat, the whole front desk, and there's a camera, which is a very high definition, that's going to project the instructor's whiteboard and everything that he's doing. So you feel like you're in a class, but there's nobody in front of you. It's a front seat. You have full interaction. The instructor sees you in a webcam, and we have people now joining from all over the world, right? In the past, we've had mostly, well, Toronto, Montreal, a few cities in North America, but now we have people from Bangladesh, Australia, Malaysia, Peru joining us. So now this is really amazing. I'm super excited because this more enjoyable way to learn that doesn't really depend on you having a math background, it doesn't depend on you having English as a first language, that's what's going to help you get to that 700 plus score. So I'm super excited. I hope you're as excited as me, as I am. So if you'd like to join us, please go on this website, book your consultation. We will connect with you. We'll make sure this is the right fit for you. Like I said, we don't accept just anybody in the program, and then we'll be able to book your seat. We also have a very, very special offer. If you are located in the major cities in Canada, in the United States, or if you'd like to come and visit us, you can actually come and join our class in person anytime within 18 months when we reopen. So your ticket includes class in person. So you'll find all of this on admitmaster.com/offer. Again, I'm not here to pitch you. You'll find all of this online. You'll see which one works better for you. But I want to show you one final thing before I pass this on to JD. And that is one of my favorite questions. I just love that question. Just it's so elegant. So here's the question. I'll give you 15 seconds to read it. Okay, well, I don't see you, but I kind of feel you that you've started reading this question for the second time. So let me stop you right here. Let me show you the answer choices. Hopefully they're going to help you answer this question without reading it. Yes, thanks, Shiva. I totally feel you're absolutely right. This is a question that many people are gonna just look at this question and just say, what do I even do? So let me show you. This is a question from the official guide 2020. And let me show you a couple of ways of doing this question. So essentially what happens is this person is finally, the lockdown is over and the person decides to go for an outdoor exercise. He runs from home, and then at some point he gets tired. He decides to walk back home. We have the speed going there and the speed going back. And the question was, how long would this person take in total to go there and back? We remember that if we need to find the distance, it's rate times time, right? That's what you're going to see in the official guide. So we have the distance from home, we have the distance back home, two different distances that should actually be the same, two different times. We can't really use this formula so easily because the rates are different, the times are different, the distances are the same, but the times together then add to t. So a little confusing, but we can maybe work out some equations here. We can factor some things out. We can isolate some like terms and so on. And I don't know about you, but I get easily bored with this sort of math, even though I'm a math person. And after about 5 minutes, I think most people are just gonna give up. It's certainly not something you want to do on the day of the test. So let me show you a different way of doing this question. And let's pretend for a second that we know the formula, the distance equal to rate times time. And I can tell you, even if we don't know the formula, that's okay, because I remember that if I'm driving at 100 kilometers an hour for 5 hours, I will have driven 500 kilometers, right? So I don't really have to remember exactly the formula. I just know I need to multiply. So I multiply speed by time. I wouldn't do anything else. Like I wouldn't divide, or I wouldn't subtract. I know it's 500. Now, look at the answer choices. I think you're going to notice something really strange. You're going to notice that the answer choice B The GMAT is trying to add speed and time. Like, is it okay to add speed and time? I don't know about you, but I don't think it's okay. So B is out. Well, how about D? Add speed and time, x plus y plus t. That's not good. How about E? Add speed and time. That's not good. So what's left? Well, I have only two answer choices when the GMAT is not doing something as illegal as adding speed and time. Just like you can probably figure by now, if I'm down to two answer choices, if I use a process elimination, I just need to eliminate one of them if the other one is right. So I'm going to look at A because it looks a little simpler. A gives us miles an hour divided by miles an hour. So x divided by y times t, which is hours. So A would give us hours. Do I need hours? No, I don't. I need miles. So A is out, C is right, and that is the right answer to this question. Now, I'd like to invite you to notice how much math we've done here. So is it possible to do something like this if you're not a math person? If you're street smart and not book smart? You absolutely can. And that's a sort of a skill that's going to be helpful in an MBA program. Now, you might be wondering, well, can I really do this? And many people, when I look at this, will say, oh, wait a second, can I really do this? One of my students came to me after a class and said, I showed this to my mom. And she said, no, you don't do this. This is not a proper way of doing question. You got to do the math. Oh, let me show you some statistics. Most people who do math get scores of 560. That's the average score. But when you learn these sort of strategies and you practice them until they become habits, so that you actually know what to do, you're going to get much higher scores. So the scores of our students on average is 670, and 35% of people who go through our program achieve scores of 700 or more. That's 35% of everybody who actually did the test. Right? So it's a pretty high number because about 80% of people who come to our program will actually do the test. About 20% of people postpone it, or life gets in the way, but it's a much higher percentage. Remember, only 10% of people who begin studying for the test actually do the test. So your chance of success after this program is about 30%. And on average, it's 0.3%, right? So what's the difference between 0.3% and 30%? It's 100 times, 100 times more success rate, if we define the success rate. Right? So just the final thing I want to leave you is, so why wouldn't everybody get a score of 700? If all you need to do is learn these strategies, practice them until they become habit, why wouldn't everybody do this? Well, there's usually some reasons, and the reasons is something we tell ourselves. And one of the reasons we say, look, I don't have the time. I remember I met a person once who kept telling me he doesn't have the time to come to the class. And then I met him 2 years later, and he told me he's been studying for 2 years, he's done the test 5 times, and he is basically just given up on his MBA dreams. Right? So don't have the time to come for class for 6 to 12 weeks, don't have the time to study for the GMAT for 3 to 4 months, give up because it took 2 years. Right? So the time, nobody has more time or less time. It's all about the matter of priorities. Well, some people saying, look, I don't have the money. And it's hard to argue with this, except when we really need to understand that we're making an investment in ourselves. And that's an investment. I was just talking to one of our clients actually today, who we were talking about him doing the test, and he did relatively well on the test himself. And then he applied to the school, and the school actually told him, if you get a score, if you improve your score, in his case by 80 points, we're going to give you a $15,000 scholarship. Right? So he called me right away, and he said, I got a conditional offer. They've taken me, but I gotta get $15,000. That's a pretty good investment. If I can invest $1,500 and I can get $15,000 in return, you can't really get that sort of a return in a stock market, even in this sort of a wild stock market, right? And these are the skills you're going to keep for a long time. So again, it's just a matter of investment. If you really want something, everything could be found. Time could be found. If we're really honest with ourselves, the money could be found for ourselves, right? Pay yourself first. That's really, really important. And if you are committed, you can absolutely get good results. We have this person who was in our class in January. He came in, he said, look, I have 2 months. I'm going to put the heads down. I'm going all in. Here's what I need to do. I need 760. He started from 570. 7 weeks later, 760, super committed. send me a really nice thank you email. You can actually read his review on our website and on Google. Right, so I'd like to invite you to think about what's really important to you and what sort of a decision you're going to make, what sort of an investment you are willing to make in yourself. Right, so make an investment in yourself first before you buy that high-flying stock, because the investment in yourself is never going to go down. Invest in your own skills. So we'd like to invite you to join us. If you haven't been in a verbal refresher class, and if you're not in any rush to study, then absolutely join us on July 28th for the verbal refresher. Our classes are starting July 11th. We still can give one person $100 off. So please go on our website, and the first person who registers, we're going to call you in the next 24 hours. And as long as we can book your seat, you're going to get that $100 off. And if not, that's going to go to the next person. And again, you can retake this class completely free in person or online until December. You can find all of these offers online. And I'm going to stick around to answer your questions. But I just want to make sure that if you are really interested, I want to know whom should I connect with tomorrow. So I'm going to just want you a really, really quick poll right now. If you can please answer this question, that would be great. And in the meantime, I'm going to unshare my screen. I'll pass control to JD. We're really very excited about having JD with us here today. I've known JD for a long time. He's an amazing person, really caring. He also shares so many great strategies. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this control back, JD. Again, thanks so much for joining us, JD. You can now share your screen and please share the strategies that they're going to help everybody get into a school such as Ivy, which is, like I mentioned, one of the most competitive schools in Canada and certainly one of the most competitive in the world.
Yeah, thanks, Sergey. Thanks so much for having me, and hope I live up to that billing. That was a great introduction. So what I want to do, probably take about 15 minutes. I want to cover a couple of things. One is to give you some advice around the decision. So decision to do an MBA or not, what kind of MBA school. Then I'm going to walk you through our class profile at Ivy. And give you some advice about how you would approach an MBA school, given your profile. And then lastly, I'll talk about our admissions process, which is very similar to other MBA programs, and give you some tips and tricks on how to present a strong application. I won't go into my background, but spent several years in higher education, working in business schools. And really what I love about my job is helping candidates make a decision and, helping them in any way, whether that's coming to Ivy or not. So please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, stay in touch that way. I'd be happy to do so and connect with you. And also on LinkedIn, I share some articles about Ivy, but also how you approach decisions on looking at different MBA programs and such. I came across this TED Talk video a couple of years ago called How to Make Hard Choices. And I'd really recommend watching it because it's really valuable as you kind of think about making the decision to do an MBA. And that's why I like sharing this video, is because doing an MBA is an extremely difficult decision, whether to do an MBA or not. And then once you decide to do one, it's choosing amongst the different schools. And Ruth Chang, who delivers this TED Talk, it has a very interesting background. She went in and did an undergraduate degree in philosophy because that's what she loved to do. And, as she finished her degree, she thought, what am I going to do to make a living? I have a philosophy degree. She went to law school, hated being a lawyer, went back and did a PhD. And her PhD was around this whole idea of decision-making. And she talks about three things that I think are very relevant. The first thing is she talks about what is a difficult decision. And this quote covers it perfectly. And I can tell you it's really about, anytime you do a pros and cons list. And there are two decisions that you're doing when you're looking at a program. And Sergey's poll just covered it. It's whether I should do an MBA program or not. And then once you decide to do one, it's how do I choose amongst the different options that are there, both schools, formats, etc. The second thing she talks about, which I think is really relevant, is when we are faced, and I know if I look back in my career and different decisions that I've made, is when we're faced with a difficult decision, we sometimes default to the easiest decision. And the easiest decision, frankly, is not to do an MBA at all, right? Stay in my job, keep doing it, and not have to quit my job, go back to school with, what's going to happen next. For many people that are international students, it involves moving to a new country. And so I'd really encourage you, as you think about the decision whether to do an MBA or not, and even where to do your MBA and what school, is not to take the easiest pathway. Just make sure you're double checking with yourself and doing that gut check. Am I making the right decision? And the third thing she talks about is giving you, and I think this is the important part, a framework on how you approach this decision. And she talks about how you approach a difficult decision is throw away the pros and cons list and start with that discussion about, what's important to you and what are you looking for? And I think that's really important. And I would encourage you, as you look at different schools, is to also look at the culture fit. What's important to you around the culture of a school. And I'll talk to you about what's important, to us here at Ivy and what we look at. And I'd really encourage you, there's lots of publications about whether you should look at rankings or not. And I do think that rankings are very valuable when you consider looking at schools. But I do that with a caveat as making sure that you look at the components of the rankings. So here at Ivy, we're really proud of our rankings. We're #1 in Canada in Financial Times. We're #1 in Business Week. But the rankings are made up of these different components, and a lot of these components are done on survey data of alumni that have gone through the program. And so make sure that you kind of look at, what's important to me and use the rankings as an important measure of that. So I'm going to go through, what's important to us at Ivy, quite frankly, as the education experience that we deliver, that impact on individuals' careers, and also what recruiters think about individuals coming out of our program. So we're really proud of Economist rankings. They rank 100 programs globally each year. And as part of that, they survey recent graduates, and we are in the top 10 in the world for education experience for 3 years in a row. So top 10 globally out of 100 schools. So really proud of that. And again, that's done by survey data of people that recently graduated. Same survey with Economist. We are top 20 in the world. So out of 100 schools this past year, it was number 16. For what they thought about our career services in the program. And so how we supported them in their career journey. Not only that first job after graduation, but also moving forward. We're also, Financial Times does a ranking, and we're #1 in Canada, but they have this component in the ranking. They survey people 3 years after graduation, and there's this component called career progress. And that's really built around, the promotions that you've received since graduation 3 years, and also the salary increases you've had as well. And finally, we are ranked 15th program globally for networking. So Business Week does a ranking each year. They rank schools outside of the US and within the US. And when you combine those two, there's about 131 schools. And on this ranking of networking, we are in the top 15 out of the 131. And this is based on what the students thought about their networking opportunities when they were in the program, primarily with alumni. It's based on survey data from alumni on how their interactions are with other alumni and networking, and also recruiters as well, from the talent that they're seeing from the program, but also the brand power of the school. I want to talk about who is an Ivy MBA. And, we're really no different in our class profile than other MBA programs, but I'm going to give you a piece of advice. And if you look at my LinkedIn profile, I did my MBA later, so on the higher end of the experience profile. And the reason that I did is I never thought I was an MBA candidate. I have a history degree, didn't work in a traditional business environment, so I kind of self-selected myself out. And I would really, really encourage you, and if you talk to any program, they're going to say diversity matters. And don't ever self-select yourself out of a given program thinking, well, I'm not a fit as an MBA student, but I'm not a fit for this particular program. And quite frankly, we're looking for tomorrow's leaders, and tomorrow's leaders come from everywhere. So when people ask us, do you have a typical candidate? We don't have a typical candidate. We're looking for tomorrow's leaders. To give you a high level sense of our class size is around 155 students. So relatively a small program. And again, we split that into 2 sections. So, out of those 155 students, there's 24 different birth countries represented. Very typical of Canada, just about 50% are born outside of Canada, 25 different passports represented. About 38% of our students come in as an international student. So they come in under a student visa. 5 years of work experience, range is 2 to 10, average age is 28, so very similar to other MBA programs, and 34 different industries that are represented. I'm going to talk about our application process and what we look for. And again, this is very similar to other MBA programs, and give you some tips as you think about applying to an MBA program and how to put your best foot forward. We look at these 5 factors, and we start with this aspect of looking at your leadership experience and potential. So for our program, we look at a minimum of 2 years of experience post your previous education. And so I'll talk about what does that mean? What does leadership experience and potential mean? We asked for 2 references, and really what we're looking for is, for us, these are forms filled out as part of our application form. We're asking for one of those references to be professional in nature. We need a minimum of 2, but you're welcome to add more. And that's really, as you think about the leadership experiences that you want to highlight in your application, make sure you choose references that have observed those leadership experiences that you're highlighting and the work experience that you are. That's the best thing about references, is not who. It's really about making sure that people have that depth of observing your character and abilities, and make sure when you think about your application of things to highlight that you're picking references that are aligned to that. I'm going to talk about previous academic experience in GMAT because we look at both in combination. When it comes to your previous academic experience, we look at your grades in the last 2 years. Our average entering grade is 78%, which I think is 3.7 on a GPA scale, I think. But about 78% are B+ level. But we do not have a minimum GPA to apply to our program. And we use the GMAT in combination with the previous academic experience. So if you're coming in with a lower GPA, we're going to look more at your GMAT score. And really, we're looking at the 2 of these areas as data points on you can handle the academic and analytical capability of the program. So I'm going to be quite honest with you. One of the reasons I delayed applying to an MBA program is I had horrible grades in my undergrad. And, so I had to write a strong GMAT and and I had horrible grades because, I just was young and didn't really apply myself. It had nothing to do with my academic capability, but I did had more pressure to write a stronger GMAT or GRE. Just to give you a sense, about 15% of our applicants will write the GRE. Many of those individuals are looking at other graduate schools outside of business where the GRE is more widely accepted, but the majority of people write the GMAT. Our GMAT average, as Sergey described, is like 670, but our range is quite broad. So the GMAT is only one component of your file, but our range of GMAT is anywhere from 530 to 780. So quite a broad range. And again, that shows that it's one component that we look at, but we look at it in combination with your previous academic experience. And then we have an admissions interview, which is really an opportunity for you to talk more about your leadership experience and your work experiences. Here's what we look for in work experience. Again, it's 2 years minimum. I'm going to talk about what type of work experience we look for and some of the things for you to look at. There are 2 aspects where you talk about work experience. And again, we're like most schools, you'll have an application form you fill out. And this is very much like what you do. So it's like, here's what I'm responsible for. And it's like your job description. And then your resume or essay questions sometimes different programs will have personal statements. We have a resume. We don't have a template to follow or a limit, but this is where you would want to talk about, how well you do your job and really talk about your accomplishments and such. One of the advices I have as you think about an MBA program is, think about your experience. It's very easy for us to talk about what we do. It's harder to talk about what the accomplishments and impact of our professional experience we're most proud of. So really start thinking about your experience and sharing your experience from this aspect of, my accomplishments and impact. So what does that mean? I'm going to give you some examples of things to highlight, right? And again, no school's looking at this whole list. This is just to give you some examples about what to include. But think about times when you've shown initiative. where you've had the ability to kind of get things done, where you had to self-manage, maybe work in a situation where you had very little direction and kind of had to make it happen, where you brought big picture thinking into the organization. Teamwork is really important. You're going to see that across every program. And the way to look at teamwork is, where have I had those struggles with a team and made it work? Where have I been supportive of a team member, and being generous and helping with their development? Persuading and communicating. One of the big examples people use is I have an idea and I need to sell it, and talk about it that way. Making and assisting decisions is a very important one. So, I was talking to a candidate recently that said, well, I don't really make decisions. And I said, well, do you make recommendations? And they said, all the time. And I said, well, do they act on your recommendations? Well, most of the time. I said, well, then you're making a decision. So think of those times when maybe you've done a report or an analysis or brought something to the table and said, here's a decision I think we need to do. And where maybe you're not in the role of making the decision, but that decision maker made that decision based on your recommendation. And the last one is think about solving problems. So this is giving you a sense of some of those things as you think about your impact and accomplishments, what to describe. References. For us, it's really important, and I mentioned at the beginning, select references that can speak best to your character and abilities. Different schools do different things. They have letters. We have a form that the references fill out. So in the online application, you fill in your reference information, send it to them. They fill out a form. You see the form. So you see the types of questions we ask and the type of characteristics we want your references to rate you on. Really important to meet with your references, explain why you want to do an MBA, and provide them with a deadline. For us, the references don't need to be in at the application. We like to receive them by the time, once you do your interview within a couple of days, because we need them before we make a decision, but we kind of keep on top of you. We ask for 2. You can provide more if you want. At least one of them have to be professional. Each school is different what they require. So it's really important to kind of ask them. But I think, start with this idea of, I look at myself, probably a reference that I would choose is not my current boss. And it's nothing against my current leader, but probably the leader, is probably 2 or 3 ago where I grew the most and had some really unique experiences. And so I think, really choose those referees that can speak best about your character and abilities. Previous academic experience, I talked about it. We looked at the grades of past 2 most recent degree. We also look at the program of study. So again, if you graduated from an engineering program that's analytical in nature, there's less emphasis on your GMAT analytical score because you've shown that in your program of study. I mean, myself, that did a history degree, they were going to focus on my my quantitative scores in the GMAT. Again, we have no minimum GPA. And again, the GMAT or GRE is designed to showcase academic rigor and can balance out weaker grades. Essay tips. We have 2 essays. We have a video essay and a written essay, and many schools are using video essays. And really, this is an opportunity for you to provide a personal touch to your application. I think what's really important is you make sure you answer the question. And I talk about the essay questions in this way is that, you're going to give it to somebody to proofread. That's natural. And, when you give it to somebody to proofread, take out the question that's asked. Just give your answer. And then the best way to make sure you're answering the question is ask the proofreader to say, what question was I answering? This is really important. The truth is better than playing the game. Never ever look at this and doing the essays and saying, I think the school wants to hear this, because what happens is you go to the interview, somebody will ask questions about your essays. And if there isn't depth to the story, it starts to collapse. I think the big thing about the essays is, I provide this advice, we're not different than any other school, but we have an admissions committee tomorrow. And I was reading the files for the admissions committee tomorrow and reading the essay questions again. And, I'm reading it as a person. And I think the best thing that you do is when you write the essay questions, don't write it for an audience. Write it like you're imagining somebody across the table with you. Here's the biggest mistake. Many people will have a time limit if it's a video essay or a word limit. This is a snapshot. So I love analogies, so I'm going to give you one here. Think of the essay as the trailer to the movie. So if you think about a trailer, it's about 3 minutes long. Movie's probably 2 hours. The trailer is meant to give you a snapshot of the plot. and some of the key highlights. And the movie goes into more detail. So think about your essays as the trailer, and think about your admissions interview as the movie. Finally, be clear, concise, and creative. But most importantly, be yourself. I think that's really, really important. It's really important when you proofread. I was talking to a candidate earlier and they said, what happens if I proofread and somebody wants me to make changes? And, you know, give it to somebody to proofread for grammar, or can I, you know, am I being clear and concise? But you don't want your voice to get lost. So you don't want them to change the tonality and the tenor of your message, that your voice becomes lost. And that happens, right? We've had that situation where we write a letter or an email, we give it to somebody to proofread, they proofread it, but they change it to match what they would talk about in tonality and tenor. Interview tips. Our interviews are actually done by members. Each school is different, whether it's a individual that is in the recruitment staff, or an academic, or even alumni will be involved in the interview. For us, we use our career coaches. And the reason is, these are individuals that are going to work with you to coach you into the roles post-graduation. And so when I talk about what's important to Ivy, is meeting those recruiter expectations are really important. And so they're the best individuals, and it's really around the mutual benefit to make sure our program's a fit for where you want to go career-wise, and that you'll meet recruiter expectations. Be prepared, not scripted. Interviews are like storytelling. And, you know, what you don't want to do is sit there with a script and read it. You want to be prepared about what you want to talk about, but you don't want to come across scripted. Be yourself, do your research on the program, practice telling your stories to somebody else, and then make sure you always have questions available for your interviewer. That's really important. Just going to leave you with some final thoughts. I think my biggest advice is connect with each school that you're thinking of applying to. You know, we're here to help, and every school will have people that are involved in admissions and recruitment that are there to help you. It is so beneficial when you get an application in and you have worked with that individual, know that individual. And this is for your own benefit. When we present files to our admissions committee, the fact that we have corresponded with individuals either before the application process or after the application process, but I think it's really important to connect with each school. Get to know the culture of each school. And, you know, you can do that by reaching out to alumni on LinkedIn. Many schools will have student ambassadors to reach out to. You know, in the application process, we will connect people with faculty members, but really getting to know that culture of the school. And the final thing, be thoughtful about your final decision. It is lifelong. And, you know, put a lot of thought into that decision. And again, back to that advice at the beginning, really think about what's important to you, what you're looking out of an experience. And finally, I will leave you with this thought. And I really think, I know Sergey can talk about this being an MBA graduate. I can talk about this to myself, is this is one of those situations that you're always one decision away from a totally different life. And, you know, and seeing tons of people go through MBA programs, it really is a life-changing experience, and something that I never regret. And my only regret is I wish I did it earlier. So with that, that's the end of sort of my presentation. I'll stop sharing the screen, Sergey, and happy to stick around with you to answer any questions or anything else. But thanks for involving me today. I always appreciate this. So thank you.
Thank you so much, JD. It's always, every time I listen to you, I always pick up something new. So I hope everybody took some notes as well. And I can absolutely echo this. I have my own MBA, and this was a life-changing decision for me, absolutely. And I have, right now, luckily I have a privilege of working with so many people that I see have made some very drastic decisions. Like we can probably be here till tomorrow, and I'm sure you have thousands of stories as well of how people completely changed their lives, and I have these stories as well. So if you want to hear some of these stories, get in touch with us, and we could also talk about your own background, your own experience, and perhaps you could be the next story that we could be sharing, without, of course, sharing your name, of how your life has changed as well. So thanks so much again for joining us. We have a couple of questions here. So JD, if you don't mind, these are questions for you. So Amelia was asking, would generally resumes at 2 pages in length, should we follow this rule when we apply to Ivy, or are longer resumes encouraged to review our work accomplishments?
Great question. I would say, you know, you don't want to leave anything out, right? So what we say is just to give you a sense, the range of length can be 2 to 5 pages. That's generally. So if you need more time to kind of describe those accomplishments and impact you have, take that time to do it. So, you know, how I describe it is when you're applying to our program, throw out anything that you've learned about any resume, workshop, or applying for a job. When you're applying to our program, that's your opportunity to kind of describe a little bit more of your impact and accomplishments. So again, somebody's asking, what about one-page resumes? To be honest, that's perfectly acceptable. We don't see many of those because I think, you know, what people need to do is think about, here's my job, here's some bullet points about my accomplishments. So, you know, generally we see 2 to 4 pages. So that's just, you know, again, but every person is unique about it. And as you're applying to the program, we'll work with you, right? So sometimes people will say, yeah, you know, we provide advice on how to prepare for the interview. But, you know, if we think that sometimes we'll talk to a candidate and say, wow, they had a really good, a good story about this. And I'll say, you know, and they say, what about this? Should I include this? And I'm kind of thinking, if you're on the fence whether to include it or not, include it. There's no problem in doing that. So hopefully that answers it. But there's no formula to it. We want to make sure that people have that opportunity to describe their experience.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks very much, JD, for this detailed question. There was a question also somewhat related to this, which is whether video and written essays should be related to one another. What would you respond to that?
Yeah, the good question. And this is going to be so many programs will have written essays. The written essays are generally a self-reflective question. We have 2 of them. So we have a self-reflective question, and we also have why you want to do an MBA. That's probably the most standard, you know, essay question that you will see out there, is why you want to do an MBA and why this particular school. And then you have a self-reflective question. The video essays are a little bit different. And the video essays are, you don't have time to prepare. So what we have is we have a bank of 50 questions. You will get 2 of them. You get, probably the process takes you 15 minutes from beginning to end. And it will ask you more behavioral situations. So I'll give you an example. One of the questions we have is, you're given a day off, what would you do? Right? And it's really an opportunity for you to showcase your narrative brand. With the video essays, you don't have the opportunity to prepare. You're thinking on your feet. You generally have 30 minutes to, you know, you'll be read the question by video. On our video essays, it's actually me that reads the questions, and then you'll have 30 seconds to prepare and a minute to answer. And, you know, it's about thinking on your feet. We're not looking for perfection. It's very common that you have nerves, but it's really about more behavioral questions in nature. So they're both meant to showcase your narrative. One's very different than another, so.
Perfect, thank you. There's also a question from Sheila, and there's another question that I think they kind of talk about the same thing, is how would you describe Ivy's culture?
Sure.
How would somebody understand the fit? And what's the most important quality that Ivy would be looking in a candidate? I think these are kind of related.
So I'm gonna turn my virtual background off, and there's a purpose on it, because on my shoulder, and I don't know if it shows, there's a poster. And you know, when you frame a poster, it means a lot. I think what we look at is you want to make sure people are a good fit in the program academically, right? So you're smart, you bring some good experiences, but you work hard. But that bottom one is really important. It's about, you know, work hard and be nice to people. And this was hanging in my office on campus. And when I went to camp, of course, I haven't been there for 3.5 months. And so I went to get my mail last week, and I picked this off my wall and brought it home to my home office. So what you see behind me is my home office. That chair there is where my kids come and sit and spend time with me during the day. But I think, you know, if I describe it, it's really important to be a contributing member of the community and the network. And I think, you know, people have this impression that, Sergey, and I know you can talk about this in your MBA, it's like a cutthroat environment. Everyone's out there. It's not. It's really about this community and this community environment. And I think, you know, working hard and being nice to people is a thing. So if I had to take that and describe Ivy's culture in one word, it's about we care. And I think we care when we deal with candidates, and hopefully you get that impression in talking to me, but we really do care. And the faculty care, career management cares, but the students care about each other. What's great is you see students, they might be applying for the same job and they're there supporting each other. It's unbelievable, right? And practicing interviewing with each other. And the alumni care. The alumni care about the students and everything else. So that's how I would describe the culture. So that's why I shared that, the background. Lucky I cleaned up. I wasn't planning to share that. So,
And I can absolutely attest this as well. And this is very common in this collaborative nature in many schools, and certainly in my MBA experience as well, when people who would be second year students. So I did a 2-year MBA program. And so people in the second year would be coming to train people in the first year for their interviews, and alumni sometimes would come in and do some mock interviews. And definitely everybody is trying to help. And I think you're going to find this as well in even in our GMAT course. People are going to be sharing things with each other, and we have a WhatsApp group, and everybody's like super friendly, and they're sharing advice, they're sharing some tips and some feedback. So I think you're going to find that when you become a part of this network, there's just the kinds of things that you're going to learn and you're going to get exposed to are going to be very different. It's very hard to do this at home, especially if you're not talking to anyone, right? I mean, you could certainly, I don't know whether you're going to agree with me, JD, but sometimes I would tell people, look, if you want to learn accounting, you can just pick up a book and read it, and that's it, right? You're not coming to MBA just to learn accounting. You're coming to MBA for an experience. You're coming to MBA to connect with people, to really have the support to help you get to the next level. Because simply knowing accounting and reading a book on accounting that you can pick up on Amazon for $20 is not going to necessarily get you where you need to be.
Well, I'm going to talk about this again. I'm going to use an analogy because I love them, right? So, it used to be a time when you wanted to go to MBA programs before the internet. Is you wanted to learn how to do something, you got to go to an MBA school, right? So you want to learn how to do discounted cash flow, go to an MBA school. Now you can learn discounted cash flow by typing it into YouTube, right? And you have somebody that will walk you through the steps and everything else. And I'm going to use an analogy about concerts, which we all can't go to now. But when you look at the music business, the one growing area is live concerts. But you could sit on YouTube and look at live concerts if you want to. Why are people going to live concerts? It's because of that experience, right? You're part of the crowd, you're part of that. That is why, people aren't buying CDs anymore. They're downloading and listening to it. But the number one growing segment in the music industry is concerts, live concerts. And people are going to them in droves. And so, and paying a lot for tickets. And that's what an MBA gives. It's around that experience. It's you're developing the network, you're developing the knowledge, but like anything else, and Sergey, you would know, you'd read an accounting textbook or you'd read articles and you come into class and you'd think you nailed it. And then you get into class and somebody beside you, mentions something, or you're in a case discussion, and that back and forth happens. And that's the power of it for sure. So.
You're absolutely right. And even I love your analogy about concerts. And if you can imagine some of the experience that you've had in your life, so some of the most memorable things, people would often say, well, one of the most memorable things, I was at this concert, I was at this game, or I was at this final game with Raptors. And it's like, and I was there, right? And the same thing was an MBA. I was there. It was a life-changing experience. And there was a survey done by the GMAT where they've asked like thousands of candidates what their experience was in the MBA program. And I don't remember what the exact number was, but it was well in the 90th percentile when people said this was a really rewarding personal and financial experience. There was, like, again, well over 90% of people said they could not have been where they are right now if not for an MBA. And it was just an amazing experience. And then there was also a question, was this a financially rewarding experience? And what they found is that only on this one question, was this financially rewarding, they saw a little variation. When they asked about personal professional, whether they asked people who just graduated or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, almost all of them said, yes, absolutely. And I still remember this was some of the best time of my life. When it comes to financial rewards, which is interesting, people who just graduated, most of them said, I'm not quite sure. I still have yet to see this reward. What was interesting is when you look at 3 or 5 years, the numbers were right up to well above 90%, right? So it's a long-term investment.
Yeah, and we say that to our students all the time. There's a lot of focus on that first job afterwards, right? Because it's like you go back to school. It's, you know, you have family members and friends going, oh, what are you doing afterwards, right? It's, you talk to alumni 5 years plus out. I mean, you know, as they've made career changes, even moving forward, it is an investment in your career moving forward, for sure.
Exactly. And if you look at this discounted cash flow, there you can go online and read the return on investment if you understand that investment, but the numbers are in the millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Over the next 10 or 20 years, you're talking about some serious return on investment. So I'd like to encourage you to really think about this decision from 3 perspectives: personal, financial, and professional. And remember, financial investment right now, you gotta invest, right? It's like if you put some tomatoes in the garden, you're not going to get tomatoes tomorrow. You gotta wait a few months, but you gotta take care of the tomatoes, and then eventually you're gonna get a really nice harvest. So it's the same thing here. You gotta be really committed. And if you are really committed, we'd love to hear from you. Please get in touch with JD. JD, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
The email, I think you put it in the chat, didn't you?
I did.
Right there?
I did.
Yeah, so yes, totally fine. Or LinkedIn message, right? So it's whatever's convenient. So either way, I check them on a regular basis. So yeah.
Perfect. I'm going to follow up with everybody by email. You are going to get our contact information. And please get back in touch with us. Let us know if you have any questions. We're here to support you. We've gone through this. We are now, our job right now is to help you go through this experience and get the most out of this experience. So if you'd like to join us, we'd love to help you. We'd love to serve you. And I hope that we can connect again soon. And now that I don't see we have any more questions.
I want to give one more analogy.
Yes, please.
So writing the GMAT is like training for a marathon. You got to train. You can't get up one morning and start running a marathon. And, you know, one of the biggest things I did is get somebody to help me with that GMAT. And it's like hiring a personal trainer, right? You're going to see the results faster. I mean, you can, so I'm a big proponent of getting that preparation and getting that professional instruction. Because you know, I was very concerned about the quantitative skills. And you're right about, this is not about math. I mean, I didn't take math past grade 10. It's about the logic, and you need to understand the knowledge and the types of questions that are asked, but you really, really need to understand the strategies, because part of the GMAT is getting through it quick. And most of what the mistakes people make is just the speed of getting through it. So that's my last thing. It's like training for a marathon. You got to put in the training for it. So.
You're absolutely right. Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing this analogy. I love your analogy, JD. And if I want to just add one little thing, also think about this investment. Every investment is time and money, right? If you invest in a Tesla stock 4 months ago, you would have made a return of 300% by now, right? So the timing is important. It's not just the investment. So if you can do your GMAT in 3 to 4 months instead of 3 to 4 years, think of what is going to add to your lifetime earnings. If you were to start your MBA in 2021 versus 2023, just because of some silly little exam that you just have to begin preparing. And when people usually ask us, what's the best time to prepare for the GMAT? Well, I usually have 2 answers to this, kind of 2 related answers. The first answer is study when you have time. Even if you think that you're going to do your MBA in 2 to 3 years just because you're still gaining work experience, but now is the good time because you're sitting at home, you don't have a lot of commitments, you're not really going anywhere. Well, that's the best time. That's why we've seen a lot of people join us. That's why we still have a couple of seats in this course that starts this Saturday, but not too many. So when you have time, but my second advice is start now. Start as soon as possible. Absolutely. Don't wait.
And I think it's really important you book a test and work backwards, right? Because I mean, it's like running a marathon. You know the date it's happening and you do the training plan working ahead. The worst case scenario is people spend a long window preparing because you just lose momentum, and you need to kind of build that momentum up. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks, Sergey.
Well,
It's a
thank
pleasure
you so
always.
much.
So.